Today, we're going to build a drum button sequencer. If you're unfamiliar with what this does, see the link in the description for that video. Let's get started. This module uses two stacked PCBs, so the connections on the back side of the PCBs need to be soldered in first. Otherwise, getting solder to the pads for these connections, once the other components are installed, will be very difficult. So the first component we're going to install are the three 6-pin headers on the back side of the upper PCB. Next component is the 5x2 pin header on the underside of the upper PCB here. Once those components are in place, we can flip the PCB over and install the jacks. It will be useful to use the faceplate to keep the jacks aligned during the soldering process. Next, the potentiometers are installed. Followed by the buttons. Make sure that the flat spot on the buttons are aligned with the flat spot on the silk screen. Followed by the two 1 kilo ohm resistors on the upper PCB, R1 and R2. Next, install the arcade button on the faceplate. Make sure the switch will face up towards the PCB, otherwise it will not fit in your rack when complete. If the graphic on the button plunger is upside down, the plunger can be reversed by popping in the two tabs near the base of the switch and moving and reversing the plunger. Just don't lose the spring. Now comes the hardest part of the build, the LEDs. There are 16 LEDs in this kit, 4 red and 12 green, and should be arranged as shown. LEDs are polarized, and the short leg needs to go in the hole with the line across it. If this is kind of hard to see, remember that all the short legs are either towards the bottom or the right side of the PCB, depending on the orientation of the LED. The LEDs are installed by setting them in place on the PCB, then attaching the faceplate with a few jack nuts. Flipping the assembly upside down and wiggling the LEDs till they all poke through the faceplate, then soldering the LEDs in place. I found that I had to snip the legs as I went to access all the solder pads. And with the LEDs done, the upper PCB is finished. We start on the lower PCB. Once again, we're going to start with the connectors that go between the two PCBs. The method I use to make sure the connectors line up is to place all the pin sockets on the pin headers located on the underside of the upper PCB. Then place the lower PCB onto the sockets, then solder. This prevents any future pin alignment issues. Next is the chip socket. Make sure to align the notch at the end of the socket with the notch on the silk screen. Followed by the power connector. Next, the 1 kilo ohm resistors, R1 through R9. All of them are located near the top of the PCB. Followed by the 100K resistors, R10, 11, 14, 22, and 23. Then the 10K resistors are 16, 20, and 21. The 33K resistor R13, the 47K resistor R12, and the last resistor R15 at 470K. Now for the polarity protection diode, a 1N4007 at D9. Note that all diodes are polarized, and the band on the diode must align with the white stripe on the silkscreen. Next, the two signal diodes, 1N4148s at D1 and D11. Followed by the 3904 transistor at T2. Note that the flat side on the transistor must align with the flat part of the silkscreen. Next are the ceramic capacitors, C1, 2, 4, 5, 7, and 12. These are all the same at 0.1 microfarads, written on the capacitor as 104. Now the electrolytic capacitors, C3 and C15 at 10 microfarads, written as 106 on the capacitor. These are polarized parts, so make sure the long leg on the capacitor goes to the plus sign on the PCB. The final part is the 7805 voltage regulator, IC4. This is a polarized part. Make sure the silver tab faces towards the top of the PCB. Now install the lower PCB onto the upper PCB. Then install the switch onto the button. Using the included wire, solder the outer two terminals of the switch to JP1 on the PCB. Wire order doesn't matter, so just solder it in a way you find the easiest. Finally, install any remaining jack nuts and all the chips, and you're done. Time to mount it in your rack and make some noise. These kits are available from the link in the description below. Thank you for watching, and stay reckless.